The Last Lesson: How Rod Serling, Helen Foley, and One Sealed Letter Changed My Life by Anthony Mark Ruspentini. In the spring of 1979, something extraordinary happened in my life. I didn't fully understand it then, and to be honest, I'm still unpacking it all now. But the pieces have aligned over time, and what once seemed like coincidence now feels more like destiny. I was 16 years old, a shy but curious teenager attending high school in Binghamton, New York. That's where I landed in the public speaking class of Miss Helen M. Foley, a revered, sharp, and quietly legendary teacher who had spent more than 4 decades inspiring students. What I didn't know at the time, not really, was just how legendary she was, and how deeply I was stepping into the lingering echoes of something much larger than myself. A name that still echoes. Rod Serling, the creator of The Twilight Zone, grew up in Binghamton too. He often credited Helen Foley as the teacher who had the most influence on his writing and worldview. In fact, he honored her name directly in one of his most powerful Twilight Zone episodes, Nightmare as a Child, where a kind-hearted teacher named Helen Foley becomes the emotional anchor of a haunted girl's trauma. That teacher was no invention. It was her. Serling, of course, went on to define modern science fiction and moral storytelling. He was more than a screenwriter. He was a philosopher with a typewriter. He tackled racism, war, conformity, power, and fear, often by wrapping deep truths in strange parables. One of his most disturbing Twilight Zone episodes was It's a Good Life, about a boy named Anthony Fremont who had unimaginable powers and used them without mercy. He could wish people away into nothingness. He could bend reality at will. Everyone feared him. No one dared correct him. He was the cautionary tale of power without guidance, of brilliance without heart. Now here's where my story begins to blur with that one. The sealed letter. I had often stayed after class with Miss Foley talking about her career, her memories of Rod Serling, and his recent passing. He had died in 1975, just 4 years before I entered her class. She missed him deeply. You could feel it in her voice. One day, March 21st, 1979, to be exact, the day after my 16th birthday, she handed me a sealed envelope addressed to my parents. She told me it was just a note, but it wasn't for me to read. My conservative Christian parents, perhaps wary of how deeply I was drawn to storytelling and mystery, held on to the letter, but didn't share it with me until years later. When I finally read it, here's what it said. Dear parents of Anthony, you probably are well aware that your son is courteous, intelligent, and interesting. In school, he is such an asset to the speech class that I thought you might like to know that he is always prepared, attentive, and aware. He is an unusual boy, and his attitude is one of helpfulness and shy, quiet confidence. I have liked him immensely from the beginning of the term, not only because he is such a polite, attractive boy, but because he wants to learn. You must be proud of him. He reflects a wonderful upbringing. Congratulations. Sincerely yours, Helen M. Foley. That letter became something sacred to me, not just praise from a teacher, but a kind of blessing, a passing of the torch. The deeper story, what I learned later, was that Rod Serling had been developing a new script before his death, one that would revisit It's a Good Life, and attempt to bring closure to the character of Anthony Fremont. He reportedly shared those ideas with Helen. The premise was that the once terrifying boy, now grown, might be confronted by a mentor figure, perhaps even a teacher named Helen. But Serling died before finishing the project. And the boy with godlike powers, Anthony Fremont, never got his reckoning. Not until years later, in the Twilight Zone movie released in 1983, where the Fremont story was revived as one of the anthology segments. By then, Miss Foley had retired. Spring 1979 had been her final semester after 42 years of teaching. She went on to help preserve Rod Serling's memory by supporting the opening of the Rod Serling Museum in Binghamton. But her last semester of teaching, her final public speaking class, included a quiet 16-year-old named Anthony. Me. Redemption through character. Looking back, I believe Miss Foley saw something, not just in my name, but in my nature. I wasn't the Anthony Fremont that terrified a village. I was the other Anthony, thoughtful, reserved, reflective, quietly imaginative. By writing that letter, I think she was rewriting the story in her own small way, offering her final word on what an Anthony could really be, with kindness, curiosity, and care. She had watched one Anthony become a monster on screen. And then perhaps she saw another Anthony, me, who might live up to the opposite idea, that a child with imagination, guided by truth and empathy, could grow into something hopeful. The last lesson, The Twilight Zone, isn't just a show. It's a state of mind, a place where meaning shimmers just below the surface of coincidence, where stories fold back on themselves and become personal. I believe Helen Foley's final lesson, given to me in the form of that letter, was a quiet act of legacy, one that neither she nor Serling could have scripted. And yet somehow they both did, and now it's mine to tell.